So welcome everyone to PDA 101. So maybe Brooke and I will introduce ourselves. I'm Diane Gould. I am a clinical social worker with a private practice outside of Chicago. I am the founder and executive director of PDA North America. And one of the things I like to say is I've been a social worker in the field for about 40 years, and I feel I have learned more in the last 5 years focusing on PDA than I have in my entire career. And surprise to me, as I was diagnosed last April as autistic at the age of 65. All right, Brooke.
Yes, myself. Hi, yes, I'm Brooke Madera. I learned about PDA. Oh gosh, I can't keep track of time, but like 2.5 years ago, someone sent me a link to the PDA Society description of PDA. And it was almost non-eventful. I was like, oh, yeah, okay, that explains my whole life. That's cool. There's a label for it. Um, but as I got to know the community, I learned a lot. It was like just mind blowing because I went from feeling like a lot of my struggles were because of things that were things that I had went through, like traumas or whatever, to realizing that, like, yes, a lot of my struggles have come from traumas, but a lot of those traumas have been because I haven't known how to support myself as a PDA person. And I didn't know I was autistic, and I didn't know how that was affecting me. And so I started seeing, the more I learned about families and parents and kids and hearing their stories, my autistic brain just started piecing things together, and I created No Pressure PDA as a place for me to share my insights and to hear people talk about it. And yeah, now I partner up with Sally Katz PDA. She's an author, very prolific in trying to spread awareness, and so her and I have a book. We hopefully it will be published at some point soonish, about PDA. And I mean, I feel like I forget half the things I'm doing most of the time. I do a lot of online stuff too. So anyway, that's me in a very small nutshell. And I have three PDA
Yes.
boys. Sorry.
That's what I was going to remind you of. Just
Yeah, I was like, oh, I have kids
them.
too.
Yeah.
I always forget like really important parts of my story. But yeah, I have three PDA boys, and we do homeschooling in an unschooling format. We just have a very different kind of life, and so it's been a joy to understand PDA because it's helped me to kind of know what to prioritize, and we'll talk about that, as part of this presentation. So
and Brooke and I are going to go pretty quickly because there's so much stuff we want to talk about, but we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. For those of you who are watching this live, other people can just find us and email us. I always like to start with history. That helps for my brain. And hopefully it helps for some of your brains too. So a brief history of PDA is that in the 1980s in the UK, a psychologist named Elizabeth Newson was diagnosing children with autism. And she noticed this subgroup of autistic kids who were different than the majority of autistic kids, but very much like each other. And one of the traits that stood out to her was that they avoided everyday demands. So she decided to call this group PDA, Pathological Demand Avoidance. We kind of wish she hadn't used the word pathological, but she did it on purpose because she wanted people to understand that these kids just couldn't help it. It wasn't intentional. And since the 1980s, she began spreading the word. And in 1997, also in the UK, became a contact group, and it was mentioned by the National Autistic Society in 2008. Some research was done in 2010, and the first book on the topic was published in 2011. Still a great book, Understanding Pathological Demand Avoidance in Children, and it's by Phil Christie and Ruth Fidler. The first PDA awareness date was 2013, and the PDA Society, which Brooke had mentioned, and we kind of always go to because they're kind of the worldwide leaders. They were established in 2014. So we're behind, but we're not that behind. And I really think we might catch up. Like everything in the world of autism and disability, I got interested in PDA because there was a mother who I'd been working with her family, and she found PDA and she wouldn't take no for an answer and kept sending me article after article after article until I paid attention. And I had heard of PDA before, but there was always so much new stuff popping up that I didn't really pay enough attention. But I had always focused my career on serving autistic individuals and was also working on supporting individuals with trauma histories. And when I read the PDA books and articles, I thought, oh my gosh, this is just what I've been recommending for all my clients who had trauma and pretty much using for my autistic clients. Anyhow, it just was kind of said all much better than I had been saying it. So I thought, all right, I'm going to learn about PDA. And I met somebody in the UK who was willing to train me pretty early on in that training. I got all excited, as I do, and said, all right, I'm going to have a workshop in Chicago and see if anyone comes. That was March 2020. I figured if no one showed up, like the speakers from the UK and I would go shopping or go to Chicago restaurants. But we had about 165 people travel just to be in a room with other people who get it, who had the same kind of lived experience. And if March 2020 rings a bell, it's because that's when the world shut down. And fortunately for me, the world shutting down allowed me to get a website up and running. It's not as nice as our current one, but I wanted people to have something to show when they talk to other people about PDA. And now every year in March, we have a conference, as Ruth mentioned earlier. And every year it gets bigger and the awareness grows. We have usually 2 at least webinars each month. We have parent support groups. We have trainings, and we have them for parents and for professionals. We became a nonprofit in 2023. And in 2024, I published a book with Ruth Fidler, Navigating PDA in America, because I wanted there to be a book for an American audience that talked about our healthcare system, our school systems, and, kind of used American English instead of British English. So that came out in July, and here is doing pretty well. All right, going backwards. People, oh, go ahead, Brooke.
Yeah, my little
Sorry.
face in the corner. It's okay, you can still chime in. Yeah, so just a little bit about like where are the PDA people? How many are there? What we know right now is that there's an estimate that 1 out of 25 autistic people are PDA as well. So, like it says there, 4 would be, so out of 100, yeah, out of 100 autistic people, 4 would be PDA. But just keeping in mind that's just an estimate. What I see is actually that PDA is missed as an autism diagnosis because of the social skills component. And for me personally, that was why I didn't think I was autistic, even after I heard about PDA. I thought it was a trauma response. And, but you have to, when you see that, like, there's these assumptions made, and we talk about that here in the slideshow, but assumptions being made about, how autism impacts social interactions. I realized, like, oh, wait, I'm very exhausted. I'm very exhausted a lot of the time. And yeah, some of the time I can be very engaging and charming, but then other times I will say completely the wrong things. And so PDA kind of, I think, is disguised in other diagnoses, especially personality disorders and bipolar. I was misdiagnosed bipolar for quite a while. Did you want to say something,
Yeah,
Diane?
just that, and many children, especially children of color, are diagnosed as ODD, oppositional
Mm-hmm.
disorder, and their autism is fully missed.
Yes. Yep.
Too. All right. When I started the PDA effort in 2020, I was pretty much blown away that I was talking to parents all over the country, and they shared and said the same things. So it didn't matter whether, as a parent of a 15-year-old living in an apartment in Manhattan or a parent of a 5-year-old calling from a farm in Idaho or Iowa. I don't know if they have farms, to be honest, but I don't really know Iowa either. But anyhow, they all kind of talked about when they first heard about PDA, it was a light bulb moment, and that their child had been given various diagnoses, but the parents thought they never really fit and they thought something was missing. And I also talked to many parents who thought through their own research that their child was autistic, and then would take them for 1 or 2 or 3 neuropsychological assessments and would be told by the psychologist that your daughter is way too socially interested to be autistic, or your son is too imaginative, or your child, they make eye contact, so they can't be autistic. And one of the things we're trying to do at PDA North America is change that. And probably the saddest and hardest thing to hear from talking to parents was that they all tried so hard to follow the guidance and advice that they were given from professionals, from the child's school, from parenting books, from the pediatrician, but none of it worked. And sometimes it even made things harder.
Okay, so a little bit about the name. We touched on pathological. The idea behind that word is just to really give an encompassing picture of how big of an impact it is. A lot of people within the PDA community prefer to go by pervasive drive for autonomy, to kind of communicate that their needs aren't just about avoiding demands, but their needs are often rooted in this need for independence, for not being under control, which our society and our system and our culture is very top down, which is very difficult for the PDA nervous system. And sometimes this is something that's coming out more and more. Extreme demand avoidance was used or has been used interchangeably with PDA, but there's more of a movement now too to separate that, which later in the slideshow I'll kind of talk about why that is. But it's sometimes used interchangeably. Extreme demand avoidance. Did you want to say anything, Diane?
Nope, you did it beautifully.
I covered it. Cool.
Did. So in my first conversation with Ruth Fiddler, when I was getting up the nerve to ask her to write a book with me and wanting to learn everything about PDA from her, I, scheduled a Zoom and had a whole list of questions about PDA, and she shut me down probably within the first minute in a very polite British way, and told me that we can't possibly talk about PDA until we talk about autism, because America has such an old-fashioned, stereotypical view of autism, which is so incorrect. And I've been so grateful that she told me that personally and professionally. And she was so right. So in any talk about PDA, we need to talk about autism. And one of the things I love about our American PDA effort is that it is helping people understand autism so much more accurately. And one of the books I found early on in this understanding autism journey was by Dr. Devin Price, who is a sociologist in Chicago. And he wrote a great book about, it's called Unmasking Autism. And he says in it that most autistic people are hyperreactive to even small stimuli in the environment and have trouble distinguishing between information and sensory data that should be ignored versus data that should be carefully considered. And I think that is so important and useful information in terms of understanding autism. And another thing he talks about in his book is that processing a situation takes so much more time and energy for an autistic person than a neurotypical person. And I think it's helpful for us if we support autistic and PDA people to recognize that exhaustion. And Donna Henderson, who's a fabulous psychologist in Maryland, who wrote with others, the book Is This Autism? And she's been a great support to PDA North America. She says it, I think, so clearly that, and she says that being autistic at its core means having a different kind of nervous system. So people who have this kind of nervous system experience, process, and respond to the world differently than non-autistics. And I find that so useful as a mindset too. Most of the people like me who are taught at school or in books or conferences about autism were really taught about the stereotypical presentation. And anytime there's a character in a TV show or movie who's autistic, it generally is this stereotypical presentation. Some of our colleagues, we've tried to find better words than stereotypical and non-stereotypical and did a deep dive with the thesaurus, but this is the best really that we came up with because it's kind of the most accurate. And the stereotypical view of autism are people that are concrete and pragmatic. They love routine. You can notice their social differences easily, but you don't notice their empathy. It's an externalized, noticeable portrayal of autism, includes high anxiety, and people go into fight or flight or fight or flee when they're under stress. For a non-stereotypical view of autism, it takes more nuance, and PDA belongs in this category. It's a non-stereotypical autistic presentation. So it's existential, and there's high camouflaging. Non-stereotypical autistic people also have special interests and strong interests, but they blend in socially and culturally. It's interesting. Being interested in autism is one of those special interests. It's often a more internalized presentation, so people don't always see what's going on inside, or what's on the outside doesn't match what's going inside. High anxiety, and non-stereotypical autistic people are hyper empathetic. And under stress, there could be fawning, fighting, fleeing as well.
I think probably. I'm looking at that. I'm like, we should have put freeze.
You know,
for-
I know we did.
Yeah.
I added some stuff, but somehow I probably didn't get them to you. But yes,
Oh,
I did add it. So the next round will have freezing.
okay.
Absolutely. So just in a summary with this, we have to move away from this traditional view of autism. It's a way of experiencing the world. It's not a checklist of behaviors. Unfortunately, in the schools, they still use this really triggering checklist of behaviors to qualify somebody for being educated under the classification of autistic or autism. And one of the things that the PDA folks knew all along is that by understanding autism differently and PDA, it's an inclusive category of girls and women. So for PDA, we talk about gender differences as 50-50, unlike what all of us were taught about male-dominated PDA. I thought you were doing this, but should I do it? No?
Yeah, just keep going.
All
It's all
right.
right.
Sorry about my dog, people. But I view that animals make Zoom better. So hopefully everybody agrees. So Christy Forbes, I just actually got off a training she was doing to do this, and she is a friend of PDA North America, and she is a PDA adult raising PDA children in Australia. And Christy is just an amazing writer and speaker, and I just love how she talks about autism and PDA and her philosophy. And she talks about helping people move from this like doom and gloom narrative of neurodivergence into the light of a positive autistic identity. She also talks about this needed paradigm shift as a society from a perspective of autism as a medical disorder to an identity and culture interwoven with pride. So if anyone gets a chance, they should do a training with her or read her work. She's pretty amazing. Okay.
All right. And just can't go without mentioning that, as I mean, I don't know what's common knowledge or what's not. I kind of get used to what's common knowledge for me, but when I'm used to talking to families and hearing about their stories, it's very common to have these other co-occurring conditions. So, you've got a lot of times you've got OCD going on, anxiety is common, ADHD is common. So it's normally not just, PDA. I mean, it's never actually, I can confidently say that. It's never just PDA going on with the family. So, during this presentation, we're going to be talking about, specifically PDA approaches. But, when it comes to supporting a person or supporting a family, it's just good to realize that there's going to be other elements at play too, and supporting those is going to be part of supporting the PDA person as well. And we also have, I put down at the bottom a link for, so Sally Cat and Rico, who's another PDA advocate, they created just an informal assessment. They found a list of, I think it's like 42 traits that are statistically more significant or more noticeable within the PDA community than within the non-PDA autistic community. So they have this little assessment that you can take if you feel like you might relate to PDA, and you can kind of get an idea of where you score on that.
Yep. But every person's unique, even though in a presentation like this, we're kind of lumping everyone together. There's so many individual differences. So I'm just going to talk a second about getting a diagnosis, because that's often on people's minds. And I think there's pros and cons, and people really have to make an individual decision. Like, is it worth it? It's, you have to find the right person, which is critical, which makes it harder. You can't just go to the person on your insurance panel. It needs to be someone who understands autism broadly and understands PDA. So it takes time, money, effort. You have to go through the screening, or you have to have your child go through, the intense testing. It's helpful to think kind of what you want to get out of it to know if you should do it, even though a lot of people do it just for validation, just wanting to know. So everyone has their own reasons. So kind of what works for someone else doesn't necessarily work for you. But finding the right person is so important. And part of that is the process needs to be talking to other people who know the individual who is being assessed. Because one of the things we'll talk about is that PDAers kind of know what's expected in the social world, and it's easy for them to camouflage and mask. So often they act in a way in their assessment. They act in, how they think someone should act in an assessment. And then the psychologist at the end says that, they didn't find any autism or neurodivergence, maybe possibly ADHD, just because they want to give something out. But it needs to be the right person, and it needs to be someone who will listen to important people in the possible PDA's life. We've gone a long way in having more and more psychologists be able and willing to diagnose autism with a PDA profile, but what hasn't caught up enough, but it will, is that the recommendations at the end of the report need to be PDA affirming recommendations, not the recommendations that are in the traditional reports for stereotypical autism. And that is something to really talk about if you're interviewing a psychologist, that they have to be PDA affirming recommendations. And lots of psychologists will still say they cannot diagnose PDA because it is not in the blasted DSM. But from where I'm coming from, I feel that they can because it is in the DSM. It is autism. So we'll talk about it a little bit. So they can diagnose autism and then go on to discuss the PDA profile and then make the recommendations match. And the PDA Society has great stuff about assessing PDA on their website. They're always a great source to go to. All right, I'm still talking. So a little bit about features of a PDA profile. What really is important to understand is that PDAs generally have better kind of social understanding and communication skills than the majority of autistic people. And PDAs are able to use that to their advantage, right? So this can mask the difficulties they are having with communication in social situations. So PDA can really be a hidden disability. And because of this, people who fit this profile are likely to need support a lot sooner than they are recognized as needing it. And it's one of the reasons why we are trying to build PDA awareness.
So yeah, a little bit more just about the features you're gonna find. So the resisting and avoiding ordinary demands of life. Again, not everybody's the same. So maybe one child is feeling pressured about toileting, and so it's not a medical condition that they're struggling with. They're not using the bathroom because they need some kind of medication. It's the pressure and the feeling of demand to use the restroom that maybe is keeping them from that. Or sleep. Sleep can feel like a demand. So then maybe they just want to keep staying up, staying up, staying up. So it's this all encompassing where you're going to find it in some unusual places. One of what I think is a really good marker of PDA versus other kinds of demand avoidances would be, if things that the child normally likes to do, if excitement or the intensity of emotion can make them avoid the thing that they like, that can be a PDA indicator. So it's not just avoiding things that we find that we don't like because of, what would say like typical, autistic avoidances like sounds, lights, the amount of social interaction, overwhelm. It's not just those things. It's other things too. The using of social strategies is part of avoidance. This one makes it kind of tricky sometimes. Even parents who are learning about PDA and they're trying to figure things out, they'll ask their kids like, well, what can I do to help you? Some kids will just be like, well, I don't even have a problem with that thing. So, you'll get responses that you're like, well, I don't know what to do with this, but it's not a choice that's being made. It's an instinct. And again, each kid kind of has their own way of doing it. I've got one of my boys that he's a people pleaser, actually. So you would think PDA means, defiant, trying to get away with things or whatever. He actually tries really hard to meet expectations, but then he avoids other things and he struggles with plugging in his tablet, even though the plug-in cord might be inches away from him. So it shows up in different areas for different kids. So don't look for the exact same thing with every kid to decide are they PDA or not. The sociable factor definitely is at play, not only being more sociable, but being more in tune with what's happening around them socially. we might not really be able to articulate like what specifically is happening. Sometimes we can, but I find that sometimes I'm just reacting to how it feels before I even know what it is I feel. So kids are very, very sensitive to, feelings that are a lot of times the feelings of the people that are around them, their caretakers or classmates and stuff and such. And experiencing, changes in mood and impulsivity is another indicator. Sometimes hypervigilant, very sensitive, and intense emotions, and acting differently in different settings is another one. So, there's the kids that, go to school and maybe keep it all together at school, and then they come home and they feel like they can relax, and then all of the exhaustion means they can't do anything that they need to do at home. So, that creates a lot of confusion, especially for teachers who then blame, the parents, because obviously if it's just happening at home, well, then it must just be a home problem, right? No, it's exhaustion and that masking.
Right, right, too. So generally, right, so PDA individuals have difficulty complying with requests of others and following routines set by others. But as Brooke said, sometimes they can't even do things they want to do. And that, I think, is pretty unique to this population. PDAers are said to have a need for control, which I think we talk about a little bit later, too. It's an anxiety-based need for control. Another feature that is so interesting, I think, about PDAers is that they don't really appreciate hierarchy or age differences. Kind of the formal way we're supposed to talk about this is that they don't see hierarchy or age differences, but I think they see it. I think they just don't think it's relevant. Like, why would a school principal get more respect than a fourth grader? Like, it's not logical. It doesn't make sense. Respect should be earned. So that is something that stands out for lots of PDA people is, and parents are often well aware that a child doesn't feel they need to act a certain way or do something just because a parent said so. Also, what's unique with this population is PDAers are very comfortable in role play and pretend and can use role play and pretend to avoid demands, but also to comply with demands. They might be able to do something as a character. Like many autistic people or most autistic people, PDAers can be obsessive, but with PDAers are much more likely to be obsessive with people than with things. It can be an issue, like if the person your kid's obsessed with is the girl who sits next to you in language arts. It's a lot easier if she's obsessed with Taylor Swift. And sometimes because of the obsessions and difficulty navigating the social world, PDAers can appear dominating and controlling in play. The more anxious they are, the more this is going to happen. They might have trouble kind of sharing a friend and having to navigate multiple people in the interaction. But PDAers as a group, when they're kind of feeling confident, are very engaging and charismatic. And can be very successful socially. And as Brooke said earlier, PDAers are hypersensitive, so they absorb the emotions of the people around them. So they're support people, but it can be other kids in the classroom who are having a hard time that can be really hard for them. And I don't really know where the whole like autistic people aren't empathetic comes from. My guess is that when people are trying to survive and they are, just focused on being okay, they might be too anxious to worry about other people's needs or even the impact of their own behavior on other people. But all the autistic people I know and PDAers feel deeply even if you can't tell it on the outside. Oh, I went the wrong way. All right. Brooke.
All right. So I won't dive into this real deep. I just, when you get you'll get a copy of this. You can check it out in your own leisure. But I did a post a while back on my page that was one of my most popular ones where I just kind of broke down some examples of different styles of demand avoidance. So like I said earlier, there's trying to be this movement away from using extreme demand avoidance interchangeably with PDA. And that's because it's become known for like a very specific set of behaviors, like very externally viewed. So other people notice it. Okay, this person's defiant. This person can't do this, can't do that. It's very clear. The problem is that that can happen, whether or not someone's PDA, that can happen as well. Just being autistic and not being properly supported. So if I'm autistic and I'm not properly supported and I don't have an environment that meets my sensory needs, or that is too overstimulating, then I am going to be able to do less and less. So that turns into extreme demand avoidance. So a kid in a public school that's not identified as autistic or properly supported or whatever, because there's more than one reason to be missed for autism, including, you know, it is a privileged actually diagnosis. So anyway, we're just trying to like filter through like if someone is demand avoidant, but it's because they're not properly supported, we want to be able to identify that so that they can then be properly supported versus the PDA profile has some quirky, we'll call it quirky or quicksilver differences like tone of voice. Tone of voice can impact how a PDA person reacts to you. I have to be careful with my kids. They pick up on, I mean, I can't always be careful, but I have to be mindful that like how I ask a question isn't too demanding in the language. So like declarative language comes in handy when it's like, should we go to the store? Like a neutral request, stuff like that, is more palatable. Or it's a nice day outside. I might go for a walk. Uh, Sometimes even just like if I'm hoping my kids put on their coat, like jacket, I might just say the word jacket and hold it up. But the less I'm using like demands or pressure or whatever in my language, the less triggering that is for my child. So that's a little different. That's actually quite significantly different between non-PDA autism and PDA autism. And of course, there's a range here. I'm not trying to be too extreme, but just say that like most of the time, and especially the friendships I have with non-PDA autistic people, we kind of drive each other crazy because I will be indirect and that's comfortable for me, and they will be direct and that's triggering for me. So we're like triggering each other with this very different communication style. Things like the relationship that you have with the person can completely make it or break it. If you don't feel a sense of trust, again, that's true of all of humanity, but this is sometimes, we're talking drop of the hat reactions, not something built up over time. Wanting something too much can be triggering for us. If something feels important or expected, feels like pressure, and even being watched, which is what's made it very hard with the diagnostic process around PDA. So if just being observed makes us feel threatened, then, and we have this skill to mask or to use social strategies, that's a really quick way to not get diagnosed. And it's a common problem. You can go to the next one. Oh, that skipped one. Oh wait, go back. Can you go back one?
Good if I knew how.
I thought back again. Huh. Okay. Well, it's missing a slide, but I had there it is. Okay, cool. And this is just some other things that can look like demand avoidance, but aren't necessarily. So ADHD is, we're very driven by our interests and what we find novel or interesting. So it's not really being triggered by an expectation or demand in that instance. It's just we can't engage with the thing because it's not it's not a fit for us, or we don't find it interesting enough. Trauma can impact us and make us avoid things because of, past experiences. And then, like I kind of mentioned, just autistic avoidances that everybody who's autistic is going to have, lights, sound, overstimulation, understimulation, stuff like that. And then keeping in mind that, we do have more than one thing going on. So I know it's kind of complex, but um, just to say that, we're not all one thing, and these different things are going on with us. So
Thank you. And these slides are so pretty.
thanks.
I could obsess on them. All right, so now I'm going to talk about supporting a PDA profile. In kind of 2020, when I was first learning about PDA, PDA adult said very loudly in a conversation and strongly that he hates the word strategy, wishes no one would use it. He hates the word strategy. And I kind of thought to myself, yeah, I use the word strategy. And it really took me years to fully get it. And I'm trying to break the habit of using the word strategy. Because what it really takes is a mindset. It's a mindset that creates an approach to supporting someone who fits the PDA profile, a PDAer. Strategies, I think one of the problems with them is they can be kind of pulled out and taken back, and pulled out and taken back, and that does not work. So think about it as a mindset and an approach that's really built on a genuine relationship. And so hold on to those concepts, because they'll lead you in the right direction. Choosing priorities is helpful in supporting a PDA, indirect language and declarative language that Brooke had mentioned, even just talking to yourself. And for some people, that's not so hard. Just thinking aloud, talk to yourself is really helpful. Having the PDA person plan their own schedules and routines. Spontaneity can be helpful for this group of people, as well as humor. You kind of have to know people's sense of humor, but it can really work and diffuse tense situations. And I'm a believer, I think, in all cases, of really trying to listen, but listening to understand, not just listening so then you can kind of say your piece, listening to understand. Earning trust is the key ingredient, and everything comes out of that trust. You can follow all the strategies, using the word, or sometimes school people will call it an intervention, which triggers me a little bit, but nothing works without the trust. And that is important. Another way to think about the interactions that are helpful is having a partnership, share tasks as equals. Because it's not that PDAers can't do things, it's that they need another person often to keep their nervous system safe. Not just a helper, but someone who's sharing the task as a equal partner. So that's really helpful to me. Using empathy, but be careful that the person can tolerate it. I think what that really comes down to is if it's genuine or not. I think people can tolerate empathy when it's genuine, not when it's not. So that's something I think to think about. Realizing that stress is cumulative, it builds up, which is one of the reasons why our traditional behavioral approaches don't work, because they're based on an antecedent, which is just the last straw. Stress is cumulative, and that's why people are inconsistent, because they're in a different place in their stress level and nervous system at a given moment. And also realizing that emotions are contagious for everyone. Studies on newborn babies, emotions are contagious. So if you are frustrated and with it, your PDA, the PDA in your life, they're probably going to be frustrated. And if that makes you more frustrated, then the work is about managing your own emotions.
All right. So, just a few more, little tidbits. Allowing the PDA person to, behave in ways that feel comfortable to them in situations. So what comes to mind for me, as long as if someone's getting hurt, then that's you want to step in and intervene. But I'm just thinking, like, for instance, my kids, we were in a little like co-op. We've always done a homeschooly type thing, but we had a small once a week class we did, and they had an activity where all the kindergartners sang a song or something, and my oldest at the time, he just didn't want to, and he wanted to stand in the back, so he stood in the back, and we left him alone, and he was fine, and that was his level of participation that he wanted. So just letting them kind of determine their own comfort level and not pushing. um, and even one thing I see, without going too deep into it, is parents often wanting their kids to advocate more at school so that they're not under so much stress, but that can be really hard, to push a kid who's not comfortable or doesn't feel safe. If you're already in a setting where you don't feel safe for whatever reason, and then someone's telling you to talk to this unsafe person in this unsafe situation, what you need, that can feel even worse. So, we need to really see that the systems need adapting, the systems need changing, the adults need the training, the adults need, they need to be the ones that are providing an environment that are safe, so that the child or the adult or whoever, can then be themselves without feeling threatened all the time. Helping things make sense. So when there's differences or situations that are beyond our control, because we can't shape the world to be everything we want. Helping to explain things why they are the way they are, can make them, feel less arbitrary, therefore less controlling, and therefore then that person can do that. The PDA, can engage with it. Um, and yeah, so like just says there, you might not be able to act until or unless it makes sense. Um, and it has to be worth the energy and the stress, that we go into it. So, new parents who are dealing with a burned out child, and I'll talk about burnout at the end. Um, it's a lot of reevaluating of what's actually priority and why. So for us, I was the one who went through burnout with my kids, and I was the one learning about PDA. My kids didn't have as much pressures as I did, and they weren't recovering from all that. But like, so for myself, I had to decide like what's what's worth the effort for me. Some things like hygiene, which is not, it's not like I don't care. I do care about hygiene. I actually would love to, like right now I'm wearing a shirt that's not a pajama top. So that's a sign of well-being to me, because when I don't feel good, I just let that go. Toothbrushing sometimes, showers. One of my kids right now is averse to taking a shower, so I will sometimes just do wipe downs. We'll just like, okay, you watch your tablet and I'll wipe you down. And it's a temporary situation. It's not a long-term one. Modeling, I love modeling. I think that is like the key to, all the potential hangups we face with trying to teach things to our kids or trying to get them to gain certain skills. I am like, modeling is so equalizing. Like, if we're focused on ourselves as parents and our own growth, and that is, I think, just expected, because we're actually usually like functioning in a way that's not working for us either, and then our kids are the ones that are showing the distress. But like, honestly, if you take a look around, like, we're all struggling. So just seeing that, like, the struggle we're all facing is a chance for us to focus on us, and then our kids will end up picking up those skills from us in a very natural way, and it's not about them, so the attention's not so on them, but it's on us, and I think that helps pass it on. Teaching communication, that's another one that I feel like I mean, not every situation's the same, but my situation is like I talk about my feelings at times around my kids and try to explain it. They ask questions, it's about me, but then they can then turn around and use that language about themselves when the time comes, and they do. Um, Not putting, again, not pressure, you're not trying to push, and you're also not wanting to ignore. One of the drawbacks to the autonomy, which again, anybody needs, like every PDA person, use whatever language suits you. This isn't about that. This is more about some of the downsides as we're trying to like teach about PDA. One of the downsides about the word autonomy is it can give this picture that if the PDA person says no to something or can't do something, then we just leave it alone, or that PDA doesn't impact us if we are left alone. But this isn't something where you just step back and you go, okay, it'll work itself out. There is a little bit of that, but we really do need safe relationships to be at our best potential. Whatever our potential is, we need safe relationships. Sometimes we need someone to troubleshoot with us, to help think about possibilities or to help support us. So,
Yeah, it's such an important message that kind of granting autonomy does not mean to ignore, because people can get confused. I'm going to talk a little bit about behavior, and some of you hopefully have heard of Ross Green. He has a technique called collaborative and proactive solutions, and he's said a lot of great things, including children do well if they can. But the thing I like most about his work is that he talks about challenging behavior as only being a sign or a signal that there's a problem. It's not the problem. And I think that's a very helpful way to frame this. I had mentioned before that behavioral approaches, they don't work for PDAers, and part of that is antecedents are just the last straw. Took me a long time to figure out that individuals who go from 0 to 60 in a heartbeat, it's because their baseline is 50 or 55, and it's the way they've always been. So they don't even know. They don't know other people don't feel that way. It also took me a really long time and made me rethink a lot of the work I did earlier in my career, that so much of behavior that we find concerning in kids is caused by their attempts to try to meet our needs, such as negotiating. That is something kids do to try to make it possible for them to meet our needs. And as we were saying before, that things have to be worth the effort and stress, because everything has a cost and it needs to be calculated. We always use the line, is the juice worth the squeeze? Because it's so important, because we really ask a lot of the PDAers in our life. And something I also remind myself too is that we cannot always make things better, but we can avoid making things worse. So try to hold on to that as well. There's also something I learned from a PDA adult, Julia Daunt. She's in the UK. She wrote a book also with Ruth Fiddler called Being Julia. And one of her contributions that I really like is that she talks about having these recovery cycles, which are repeating patterns of preparing for an activity, coping with an activity, recovering from the activity, and then preparing for the next. And it can be complicated and lengthy. And what strikes me when I think about this is that our systems are not really set up for recovery time. Kids are expected to go to school 5 days a week. Adults are expected to work 5 days a week. And that does not always work for this population because there's not enough recovery time. So this isn't like my preachy slide. Resist the urge to give consequences or threaten consequences. Regardless of the misbehavior, really, PDAers don't need consequences. Children don't need consequences. People don't do good by making them feel bad. It doesn't. And we don't have to worry about holding them accountable. Adults usually lecture or talk too much. Most of us do. And sometimes we inadvertently, we kind of dismiss our PDA's reality and try to convince them otherwise. It can be as simple as a kid coming up from school saying, Mrs. Jones is the meanest teacher in the whole world. And the parent sticking up for Mrs. Jones because she has a hard job and she has 30 kids. And sometimes she's nice, but it's so much better to validate where the individual is at a given moment. We don't need to remind people of rules and expectations. We do it all the time. We don't need to. That is not what is underneath a challenging behavior or a panic attack or a meltdown. We don't need to express disappointment. And maybe one of the hardest things, because we've all been taught, professionals and parents, that we need to do it, is we don't have to process at all. We don't have to rehash after a meltdown or something that went wrong. We don't have to talk it out. The individual can't use that information at that moment. If there's value in teaching how to handle things differently, there will be another opportunity right before a time when they can use that information. We don't need to go rehash it. And unfortunately, a lot of schools, you can only get back in the classroom if you rehash it. So try not to get stuck on that you're letting someone get away with it if there's not a consequence or not a lecture or not a rehash. And one of the things I like best about the PDA literature when I started reading it was this graphic with the two dials. And it's really about a window of tolerance that you have to, in any demand you're wanting from a PDA, balance the importance of the demand with how anxious that person is and like where they are in a window of tolerance. They have to be kind of regulated and in this middle area of a window of tolerance in order to learn or comply with a demand. So those two dials have to be balanced. All right, Brooke.
Sorry, my mute.
Okay.
And I'm gonna try to go little speedy, but we kind of talked about declarative language a little bit already. It's just less, it's not imperative language where you're just like, go put your shoes on. Like it's an order, imperative would be like an order. You're telling them what to do. You're telling them specifically what to do. It doesn't offer a lot of choices. So declarative language is just kind of, it's not a trick, it's not a way to get your PDA child to do what you want them to do. It's recognizing that like language itself has like hidden demands within it, and we can take that for granted. It still needs to be paired with lifestyle supports and a different lens shift kind of thing. But ways is like so that our language doesn't automatically trigger or shut down a reaction. You can do commenting out loud, sharing observations, allowing, like, if I try to make as many things have choices as possible. So I won't use declarative language in a situation where there is only one choice because that's misleading. So if it's like an emergency or something, it's like, hey, we got to go now. But you want to try to open up their world a little bit so they have more of a voice in the choices they get to make. Even if some of the natural consequences of that are uncomfortable. Again, as long as it's not someone else's, we don't want someone else to get hurt. We're still proactive in protecting other people or other kids, but just seeing that that there are often more choices than we are seeing in a situation. And it can be direct or it can be indirect, which I don't have the brain power right now to tease that apart, but Linda Murphy has. She has some good resources she's created to help answer that question, because sometimes if you're too vague, that is more triggering to certain people. If it's like, well, what are you even saying? What is the expectation here? What do you want? So there are more clear, direct ways to make suggestions in declarative language. It doesn't always have to be super vague and ambiguous. But yeah, Linda has a nice chart where she kind of breaks it down. So, and those are some of the words that you can use. I wonder if blah, 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 or I noticed that such and such, or I'm thinking about this. I use these all the time. I use these before I knew about declarative language because I instinctively knew that it was triggering to me to be told what to do, so I just didn't do it with my kids. And so then when I learned what it was, I was like, yep, that makes sense. So,
Yeah. And Linda's book is the Declarative Language
mm,
Handbook, and it's very easy to use, and it's a great book too. And just, with thinking about behavior, I like to use this slide. This one's, I think, from Mona Delahook, but lots of people have used it. Because it's really a visual on that, that what's observable, like observable behavior, is just that tip of the iceberg. But for some reason, that's what we focus on, that's what we target, that's what we talk about. But what really is important is understanding everything under the water. That's where sensory differences and auditory processing and trauma and history and family dynamics, so much is under the water. And those are the areas that need support for the PDAers in our life to succeed.
okay, and yeah, just a little bit about burnout because it's so common. So again, by the time, a parent or, is learning about PDA, it's usually because their child is so maxed out that they just are at their wits' end. Everybody's at their wits' end, and the child's more reactive. So just what is burnout? What does it look like? Um, it burnout impacts everything. So it impacts our capacity, it impacts our personality, and the intensity of mood swings. So we are already pretty reactive, as a PDA person, but then when you add burnout, we're even more reactive, able to do less. Um, and so we talk about like low demand parenting, low pressure parenting. So many of the recommendations that families are hearing as we talk about PDA are very much kind of an emergency centered conversation around like triaging. Okay, let's just focus on essentials right now, and that can be scary for families because they're like, what is this my child's life? And maybe maybe it is. I mean, this is a disability, but it's worth noting that it burnout is usually a long time happening and then a long time healing. So my experience has been I've been through 2 periods of burnout, and it's a very slow healing process and a lot of ups and downs, and it takes years. Oftentimes it takes at least like months months, but usually years of slow healing. So just something to keep in mind as far as capacity and what does the future hold, and etc. And I forgot to mention, I wanted to add on that slide, the previous slide too, that another common thing is nutritional struggles with kids like ours. um, I mean, I can't dive into it right now. I have a on the resource slide next. There's a Facebook group. I run a couple Facebook groups for parents and PDA people where we talk about some of the common like nutritional struggles we have, or food sensitivities. My kids are very sensitive to food dyes, like artificial food dyes, and those can impact their behavior and their tolerance as much as anything can. So it's a very big topic, but yeah, today was mostly focused on the person and like what fits us like on an interaction level. So
Yes, too. Yes, we're just kind of touching the surface. But
yeah.
but we want to leave you with that. What PDAers need above all is humans in their life who they can co-regulate with, that
Mm-hmm.
they can use the regulated, safe, secure nervous system of another person to
Mm-hmm.
feel safe in their own nervous system. And for us to be that person, we need to manage our own nervous system. We have to fight the punitive parts of ourselves. We need to be honest when we make mistakes. We need to practice self-care. Whatever we need to take care of, not just for ourselves, but to be effective in supporting the PDAers that we're trying to support, whether it's your child or your client or your student.
Mm-hmm. And I like to, we many of us have very limited resources, or yeah, not everybody has access to the same support. So you can't offer what you don't have. So honesty is just one of those, has always worked out well for my kids, where it's not like I'm dumping on them. I'm just telling them the truth. Like my emotional state, um, I can't always retreat or rest in the way I need. Like I'm a single parent and I have only so much support. And like recently, we had a death in the family and my normal support system wasn't as available and I struggled. And so there's no just like, oh, let me fix myself so I can be there for you. It's like, oh, well, I can't do very well right now. And honesty is, I think, just the best approach in that, where we're just saying like, hey, look, this sucks right now, or this isn't good for this reason. And that's, I think, even if all we can offer is validation for ourselves and for our kids, that is like huge, because I think it indicates safety. Like, hey, it's safe to fail, it's safe to struggle, it's safe to not be perfect. A lot of parents think we got to be perfect for our kids, and that's not really what we're trying to say. We're trying to say, like, what you're trying to teach them is often what you're learning to teach yourself. So
Right. And being honest is part of being genuine, and that's what part is, a
mm-hmm.
healthy relationship, right? Is
Mm-hmm.
being genuine. So here's some more, some
Mm-hmm. There
resources.
we go.
So I'll get it. Okay, and I'm gonna stop share. Thanks everybody for listening, and I think we're gonna stop recording for the questions, just because I like to do that, but I don't know. I
So
can be
thanks
up.
everybody. Thanks so much, and we will see you all next time.
Oh wait, are we answering any questions?
Yeah.
Oh, we are.
Oh.
Okay.